right, folks, welcome back. We are going to talk about the noble and ancient house of oaks today. I've been fascinated with this topic, and I hope to share my fascination with you today. Oaks belong to the family that is named after beeches. It's beech family. Beech in Latin is fagus, so the family is called Fagaceae. And in addition to beeches and oaks, there is also chestnut in our flora, and that's about it. It's you may say that this is a small family. So we have been talking about beeches and about American chestnut, and now we are going to cover oaks, and that would be the entire family covered. So I'm very excited about that. And here in this slide, you see fruits of each genus within the family Fagaceae. The fruit of chestnut, beech fruits. Actually, these are empty involucres. There is no fruit inside. And acres of a very interesting oak that has this unusual purple color. But we are going now to start from the homeland of civilization that developed and built itself with the help of oak. And for that purpose, we go to Europe and consider the only oak that is widespread on the European continent, which is the English oak. I invite you to my motherland. I'm coming from Russia, and this is the photograph taken of an English oak on the shore of the Gulf of Finland, way far north. It's northwestern part of Russia, the very northwestern corner. If you look at the map of Europe, which is in this small square in the far left, this is the enlarged part that shows the Baltic Sea here, the Scandinavian peninsula, and this part is the Gulf of Finland, this part of the Baltic Sea. It's a very shallow gulf, and this is the enlargement of the same. And you see that the Gulf of Finland is shaped here like an index finger pointing to my native city, St. Petersburg. And there is a little nondescript place not far from St. Petersburg, a little bit to the northwest of it, on the shore of the Gulf of Finland, that is called Sestroretsk. And if you translate it, it means the town on the banks of the Sister River. There's a river called Sister, and in Russian it sounds like Sestra, so Sestroretsk. And it's there that this newly built monument to Peter the Great is now standing. I haven't ever seen it, only in the pictures, because it was erected in 2014, relatively recently. And this monument commemorates a historical event. The local legend has it that Peter the Great was fighting the Swedes on the northern side of European Russia, and was after a battle. He took a rest here on this little peninsula north of the future St. Petersburg, and discovered a grove of oaks. And this grove of oaks looked pretty unusual in the surroundings, because in Russia, oaks don't grow naturally that far north. And that was the northernmost point, and still remains, for the occurrence of English oak. And so he became very excited after his discovery and ordered more oaks to be planted for the Russian fleet, of course. And so from that time on, that place has been known as the Oak Woods, or just simply the Oaks. If you translate it directly, the Little Oaks, even though they are not so little anymore. But this is officially the northernmost point within Russia for the distribution of this beautiful English oak. And here it is. It has very elegant leaves and looks a little bit like the American white oak, but not quite the same. And the major difference is that the acorn is sitting on this stalk, and the American white oak is not, the acorns in it are not stalked. And so the English name of English oak is, the Latin name, excuse me, of English oak is Quercus, that stands for oak, Robur, that stands for this peduncle. That's how the stalk is called in botany. So pedunculate oak, that's its official scientific name. To highlight the fact that the oaks are on stalk. This is the important character for identification, as you see later. So English oak also has been at the heart of European civilization. Not only that the wood was used for construction, but it was, and the acorns were used for feeding home animals, especially pigs. But also these strange structures were very important in one interesting respect. These are galls. I don't know if you're familiar with that phenomenon. Some insects, when they oviposit their eggs on the branches of some trees, they also add a little bit of chemicals in order to modify the branch or the organ where they oviposit, and that produces an abnormal growth of that structure and ends up in building a little shelter for the babies of that insect. And so there is a whole group, a family of insects, of wasps, that are called gall-making wasps. And here you see a photograph of this gall-making wasp. In reality, it is very small, it's tiny, it's not more than 2 millimeters long. So this is an enlargement. And they produce this strange looking, very regularly shaped balls that are also very hard for the galls. So this is the gall on English oak, and its colloquial name is marble gall. And they are very hard. I'm sure some of you found similar structures in the woods here, but ours are also produced by gall-making wasps, but they feel different. They feel papery, and you can squeeze them in your hand and they will just break under pressure. But not so with these galls. They are very hard. You can only break them with a hammer. And so why am I showing them to you? The interesting way they were applied in human culture is that they produced the substance that made very fine ink. That was the first ink that was produced by humankind of that quality. And it's high quality ink, and actually it hasn't been surpassed ever since. And it's still can be prepared and used as a high-quality ink. It was used on medieval manuscripts. Many of them still preserved medieval manuscripts have been made with the help of this ink. And I'm going to show you a little video now. I hope it works. That will, it only will last 2 minutes, and it will help you appreciate the making of ink of these wasp gulls. Let's watch it. It's British. So British are very proud of their big old oaks, even though this oak um, is widespread across the entire Europe. Uh, it's called English oak for good reason, because the English are the people who are most proud of their ancient old oaks. So let's watch it.
The ink that was used in medieval manuscripts was almost invariably made from oak galls. These are produced when the oak gall wasp lays its egg on an oak tree, and instead of an acorn being formed, it forms these hard, round balls, which are called oak galls. They're really tough. To make the ink, they need to be smashed with a hammer to make these fragments like this. These are then put in a jar and rainwater added on top to cover them, and left just on the windowsill for a few days. Gradually, the tannic acid is leached out of the oak galls, and this is the crucial thing in the ink. The water gradually turns into pale brown, which over a couple of days turns into a darker brown. Then there needs to be some sort of glue, adhesive added to it to make sure that the ink sticks to the surface of the skin. And in this case, usually gum arabic is used. These are these rather yellowy amber coloured lumps, which are dissolved in water to make a sticky solution. And also copperas is added. Copperas is what ferrous sulfate was called in medieval times. And this gradually turns that pale brown into a darker brown and eventually into a dense black. When in use, on exposure to air, it turns into that really deep, rich black that we're used to in looking at medieval manuscripts.
We are back to our business, and we're again looking at this beautiful paddle of ink that has been produced from oak galls. Here is what I have been talking about, this map of Europe, and you see that the green color shows us the area where English oak is widespread. So it covers, as you can see, all of Europe and reaches into European part of Russia, and even over here to the Urals mountains, which are separating Europe from Asia. And in the south, it reaches Italy and Greece and the Caucasus Mountains, and here in the southwest goes into Spain and Portugal. And also, even though that within Russia, the northernmost population is at the Gulf of Finland, in other countries, Sweden and Norway, it reaches even farther north. So the area of English oak is really enormous, and it played very important part in the development of the European civilization. Especially the Englishmen, as I have already said, are proud of it. So if you compare the number of oaks that grow here in the United States with what's going on in Europe, there is, of course, no comparison. So when I came over here, I was bewildered by the fact that there is 12 different oaks growing only in eastern Massachusetts surrounding Boston here, because I had been used to the fact that there is only the oak, the English oak. And here I had to learn about 12 different species of oaks and learn how to identify them. But if you look at the larger picture, you'll have many more oaks, scores of them in the United States, not the same as in Europe here. And this is true not only for oaks, but for any other plant. For example, in Europe, before the glaciation, there were hemlocks. But if you ask Europeans now whether they know what hemlock is, they have no idea because after the glaciation, uh, hemlocks don't grow in Europe anymore. They perished during the Ice Age. The same is true for tulip tree, for example, and for many other plants. Even if they remain, there is very few species. For example, there are only two birches, as I said, one oak, one maple, and so on, except the Mediterranean area. So why is the difference is so tremendous? Well, the answer, I think, is here. You can see the answer here on this map. So when the glacier advanced from the north onto the European continent, it naturally killed everything that was growing there at the time. And so when it was advancing, the plants were backing up from it towards south. And that tactics or strategy was successful until the plants hit the mountain ranges, which are stretched in a latitudinal direction, that is from west to east in Europe. So they hit the Alps, the Caucasus Mountains, the Pyrenees, and so on. And so all the plants perished and almost nothing survived the glaciation. And after the glacier retrieved back north, retreated, this whole business of repopulating Europe had to start from scratch. But the territory, the European territory, never actually recovered because it coincided with the advent of European human civilization, which also depleted the vegetation cover. So that happened. That's how it happened that the European plants never, the European flora never recovered. And if you compare with the events on the North American continent, it was very different here because the mountain ranges here stretch from north to south. All of the mountains, the Rocky Mountains, Cordilleras, Appalachian Mountains. So when the glacier came down from northern North America and advanced on the plains, plants peacefully backed towards south, survived there in southern refugia, and then they, after the glacier was gone, they just returned back. And so the flora didn't suffer this huge blow the way it's suffered in Europe. And that's why the North American flora is much, much richer than the European flora. So let's go on and look at this big picture of oak distribution. What's important here, first of all, look at these numbers. Here in North and Central America, the number of oaks, it's just the map for oaks, nothing else is shown. So the number of oaks is, according to different estimates, from 200 to 245 species, versus here in the old world, in Eurasia, there is less than 200 species on the whole. But if you consider Europe alone, there is only 22 all in all. But all of these 22, most of them occur here around Mediterranean. But if you look at the continent itself, there is only one species, as I said. No comparison with these 200 species in the New World. And another interesting thing, if we now concentrate on the map of North America, you'll notice there are two different things. First of all, there is this purple color, and you see that purple color is not shown anywhere else in the world, anywhere else in the Northern Hemisphere. That means that there is a certain group of oaks colored purple. Here, it's a section of oaks that occurs only specifically on the North American continent and nowhere else in the world. That's very interesting. And more than that, right now we are in the center of their speciation. That means there is like a huge fountain of new species bursting right where we live. And so there are very many relatively young species, and they all belong to this strictly North American group of oaks. We call plants that occur only in some area and don't occur anywhere else endemic to this area. So this group of oaks are all endemic to North America, and mostly to Eastern North America, right where we are. And they are called red oaks. And they are called so because the American red oak exemplifies them. And this oak is sort of at the head of this group. And so when people speak about this group of oaks, they immediately imagine the American red oak. And at the same time, along with this purple color, you see this blue line showing a contour in Eastern North America. They kind of overlap. And the same blue line is shown in Europe and also here in China and Japan, in Asia. So that means that there is another group of oaks, another section that we share with other continents. So these are called white oaks. And again, they are called white oaks because the species that exemplifies that group is the American white oak. And so when people try to put some image in their heads of that group of oaks, they imagine the American white oak. And as I said, that group is not specific to just our continent. We share it with the old world. And one example of the species of that group from the old world is the English oak, of which we just talked. So there's much in common with Europe and China within that group. So let's go ahead and look at that comparison. So that these two leaves are very memorable to me because I found two oaks growing side by side. That was in Morton Park in Plymouth. I remember that place. There were two young oaks, and to my amazement, one of them was the American white oak, and I took the leaf from that tree. But this leaf from another tree nearby, about the same size, belongs to the European Quercus robur, English oak. And they look pretty darn similar, but you have to know the secret. You have to figure out how, and I will share with you the secret, how I figured out that this one was coming from Europe and this one is indigenous to North America. See, there is these two straight lines at the base of the leaf here, and they form sort of a wedge shape. And there is no straight lines over here with the English oak. Instead, it has little lobes here, additional little lobes. So these lobes are missing with the American species. That's the difference. That's how I could tell at the first glance that I was dealing here with the American oak and here with the English oak. And that's how you can tell the introduced English oak, which sometimes you can encounter around here, especially along the coast. You can tell it from the native American white oak. So, as I said, there are two major groups of oak. Remember the purple color and the blue line that overlap and grow side by side around here in Boston. It's a group of white oaks and a group of red oaks. And these are two competing groups, believe it or not. They are rival groups. And I always like to compare this competition between oaks with this medieval war that was taking place in Britain. You probably remember the War of Roses that was taking place in the 15th century, and the subject of the war was the British throne. So there was this House of Lancaster, whose emblem was the red rose, and was the House of York, whose emblem was the white rose. So um, a similar war is going on in front of our eyes right now between the group of white oaks and the group of red oaks. And I will try to demonstrate to you that these two groups are profoundly different. Now let's look first at the white oak group. This is the white oak itself. First of all, why is it called white? There are very many good reasons for it to be called white. First of all, when you are in the woods, all of a sudden you notice a tree that is colored, whose trunk is much lighter than any other trunk in the woods. And so you can identify that way a white oak even from far away, from the distance. You say, oh, here you go, there's a white oak growing there, because it really seems much lighter colored than anything else surrounding it. And here is a photograph of an autumn puddle, and there is different leaves fallen down in the fall. Here is a leaf of red oak and red maples here, but this white colored, colorless leaves belong to white oak. Sometimes they just lose all of the colors, all the pigments, and remain white like that during the fall. There's another good reason for it to be called white. But I want to warn you that in nature, nothing is uniform. So it also refers to white oaks. Oftentimes you see them whitish like this, but sometimes in very sheltered situations, you once in a while encounter white oaks like that. When I found this tree, it never occurred to me that it was a white oak until I looked at the leaves. And yes, the leaves were belonging to the white oak. But there's this secret. The bark of white oak exfoliates. So this upper layer is usually dark, but it's not long-lived. It kind of weathers away, and then the underlying layer of the bark remains white like that. So that's what most commonly you find in the woods. This bark that is already devoid of its dark upper layer and shows the underlying lighter colored layer. And so there are no ridges on the bark. It's all flat. It only has this very narrow cracks like that, and very white colored patches that make it additionally lighter than the rest of the bark. So that's a very distinctive character of the American white oak. And also it's called white because when it produces foliage in spring, very young leaves that just emerging from buds have lots of hairs, especially on the underside. They are very fluffy, velvety to touch. And even the branches first are covered with this dense hairs, which are not long-lived and they disappear very soon. But at the very beginning, they look quite white. The entire crown first becomes white when it develops. But then when they mature, they become dark green. That's the upper side and the underside of the same branch, the leaves on the same branch. You see they don't have any hairs anymore, but still the underside is much lighter color than the upper side. So another reason for it to be called white. And then finally, here is a sample of wood of white oak. And the wood itself is very light colored in comparison with other types of wood. So I promised to explain what specific strategies groups of white oaks and red oaks employ during their lifetime. Here are the acorns that I collected in October in Plymouth. This photograph is dated October 5th, and this one, October 13th. And you see that what happens to the acorns of white oak is that they start germinating right away. Isn't it strange? These oaks, the acorns root, this is a young root. They root if they can, if the animals don't take them, don't consume them. Those that survive the attack of squirrels and chipmunks root right away after they fall down in the fall, and they overwinter as little rooted sprouts. They don't produce the stem or any leaves, but they produce the root. And see, these acorns, all of them already cracked and start producing little sprouts, every single one of them. So that's what they do for living, and that's how they overwinter. Not just the white oak, but all of the oaks of the white group. And here you see again the branch of white oak. It has these big lobes, and the lobes are rounded at the tips, and they don't have any bristles. And that's the shape of the leaves makes white oaks different from red oaks, which have pointed lobes, and each point additionally has a bristle, very thin bristle. So that's not the case with white oaks. Also, what you see there is young developing acorns, which are sessile. That means that if you translate the word sessile, that sounds like sitting. So that means that they don't have any stalks, differently from English oak. And also, what is specific to the entire group is that these oaks will develop in 1 year, versus the red oak group produces acorns that can mature only in 2 years. So 1 year with white oak group. And here is their counterpart, the green leaves of red oak, and its young acorns that will develop in 2 full years. It takes 2 years for the red oak acorns to develop. And you see that the leaves here look completely different. They have pointed lobes, and if you have good eyes, you can see even the bristles at each point. So it's not only the shape of the leaves and the shape of the acorns in these two groups are different, but also the mode of living. Here, this is the famous red oak that exemplifies the red oak group. And you see the acorns are of different shape. They are almost square. They are very plump and big and nothing but elegant, but very impressive. And the interesting part is that the date here, the date is April 23rd. So they are germinating on April 23rd. They have been overwintering without rooting, and it's only now in spring that they are going to root. So they employ a completely different strategy as compared to white oaks. And of course, one more difference is that white oaks produce acorns that are sweet, much sweeter than the red oak group. And so any squirrel or any chipmunk is hunting for the sweet white oak group acorns. If they have a choice, they leave the bitter red oak acorns alone. They are not interested, and their choice food is white oak and other oaks of the white oak group, because they are much sweeter and much more palatable even to people, let alone animals. So that makes the white oak acorns sort of disadvantaged if you compare them with the red oak acorns, because the red acorns have much better chances to germinate because the animals don't deploy their numbers. Here's another very nice oak of the white oak group. You can tell at a glance that it belongs to the white group because there are no bristles, there are no sharp points on the lobes. In fact, there are hardly any lobes. There is a wavy margin, and the leaf is very elegant, and the acorns are oval and thinner like that, like any acorns in this white oak group. It's called chestnut oak, and they are of this beautiful chestnut color. I think the reason it is called chestnut oak is because this oak used to grow together with the magnificent American chestnut. 100 or 150 years ago, it was the American chestnut that ruled the forest here. It was a huge tree, very big one, and chestnut oaks were growing together with American chestnuts, and I would rather say underneath. It was the second floor. They were much lower than American chestnuts. But now, those of you who listened to my lecture about American chestnuts know, or maybe you know from other sources of information, that American chestnut has suffered a very horrible blow during the 20th century. And so it is subject to a horrible disease. It's a fungus that has reduced this magnificent tree to a small shrub. And so it keeps killing it. It doesn't let it grow, but it only affects the upper part of the tree. It doesn't affect the underground part. So the roots survive and keep sending more trunks, more shoots every year. But those keep getting the disease, and so after a while they fall down, killed by this fungus. This is very unfortunate that this beautiful tree has been reduced to the size of a small tree or even a shrub. in the forest. So, for example, if you go to the Blue Hills Reservation here near Boston, there is an area that's called Chestnut Run. And so if you go down the trail there, you will see many American chestnuts dead or standing along that trail. And that tells you that there was a big population of American chestnut here that is now reduced to this miserable condition. But along with that, you see many chestnut oaks growing there. And in order to get to that area, you have to climb a little hill. Chestnut oak is a smallish tree that is inhabiting tops of little hills. It's a hilltop tree. And also, what's interesting about chestnut oak, it is very sweet, is the sweetest of all white oaks around here. So that even us humans sometimes consume it. Here you see this package was sold in natural food store, and this is a coffee substitute that was made of this oak. So this oak has been known to be used by Native Americans. They made a meal out of it and use it for producing breads, I guess. Something like a bread can be made of meal. And so, there are different coffee substitutes. Chicory, for example, and chestnut oak can be used as one of coffee substitutes, for example. Here is another proof of the fact that all of white oaks germinate in the fall. See, the date of this photograph is November 25th, and chestnut oak, just like white oak, is germinating. Actually, I pulled it out of the ground before I photographed it. It was already rooted in the ground. But it's a matter of luck, even finding such an acre, because they are taken by the animals, the majority, right away after they fall. So if you're trying to find them, it's a challenge. So here is at the top of the hill in the Blue Hill Reservation there at Chestnut Run, where all these oaks, these trees represent the grove of chestnut oaks. The bark is quite spectacular. The ridges of the bark are sort of not sharp. They are rounded at their very summit. So they produce this quite distinctive look to the bark. And as I said, chestnut oak is not a big tree. And so here's a friend of mine measuring this oak that was a giant compared to other chestnut oaks surrounding it. So this is an unusually big one for this species. These are seedlings of chestnut oak. They are easy to propagate. You can produce your own chestnut oak. It's just a matter of finding acorns, picking acorns on time. And this leaf was quite wide, just like that. This is an underside. And it represents a different oak of this white oak group. Now we are jumping from the very top of Little Hills to the bottom, to the swampy areas where there is a lot of moisture, and part of them are flooded during some seasons of the year. And this is a leaf, as you can read, of swamp white oak. The Latin name of this oak is Quercus bicolor. If you went with me on walks along the trails here, remember those leaves that are green on one side and bright white on the other side. That's why this oak has acquired this name, Quercus bicolor. if you translate it from Latin, it says oak of two colors, because the other side, the upper side of the leaf is uh, dark green. And this situation with two different colors remains uh, true even with dried leaves. Dried leaves look also very attractive. This photograph was taken not far from here in Cutler Park. This is across the road from here. It's also on the banks of the Charles, and there is a big grove of swamp white oaks. And if you go there in November right now, it will be you will be walking on a carpet of this bright white and brown cover of fallen leaves, very beautiful. And the acres of swamp white oak are also very distinctive. They have these mossy caps, and the acorn itself looks like a little nut, but the most distinctive thing is this long stalk on which the acorn grows. And these long stalks are unique for our area. I already told you that English oak produces its acorns on stalks, which are called peduncles. But these peduncles are not typical here with our oaks around Boston, except one, and that's this one, swamp white oak, which also produces its acorns on these long peduncles. That's unique for swamp white oak. So if you find these caps retained on these long stalks on the winter oak, you can tell for sure that this is swamp white oak. Here is a view of this grove. The photograph was taken on the New Year Day, January 1st. And you see there are big puddles, and sometimes when the Charles River water level goes up, this area gets flooded like this. And so the swamp white oaks stand in water for quite a prolonged period of time during the year. They like being in water for at least some period of time. And of course, I cannot skip showing you this beautiful bark that swamp white oaks are capable of producing at mature age. Very distinctive, again, very distinctive bark, but it's different from the previous ones. Spectacular, these spectacular prolonged ridges with sharp summits. They produce this interesting effect. And like other oaks, swamp white oaks give shelter to a myriad of different little creatures, insects, and so on. And now we are back into business with gall-producing wasps. These are the same family of wasps that produce these ink galls, but these galls are completely different. See, they look like little tiny mushrooms, but they are also produced by gall-forming wasp. This family is called Cinnipede wasps. Different genus, different species. And this is on the leaf of swamp white oak. Finally, to wrap up conversation about swamp white oak, I wanted to show you this photograph that shows Neponset River floodplain and this entire row of young oaks that are advancing on the open floodplain. And that's how the changes in vegetation take place. That's what we call the plant succession. here you can see the plant succession going on in front of your own eyes. And so this area is going to change very soon and produce this big oaks, a grove of swamp white oaks, instead of open swampy area, instead of open floodplain of the river. Now, here is one more local oak that belongs to the white oak group. And this one is called post oak, Quercus stellata. Stellata means starry. So it has hairs on the underside of the leaves that are shaped like stars, and that's hence the name Quercus stellata. But what's even more interesting to us is the shape of the leaf itself. Look at these wide side lobes that form this distinctive shape of the leaf blade that is akin to Maltese cross. So here is how it's shaped, very unusual shape. It's a little tree that you can only see on the Cape. It doesn't occur anywhere else in Massachusetts but the Cape. So it's relatively rare in our state, and it is watch listed. That means that it is not legally protected by the state, but anyway, the state makes the effort to record all of the occurrences and see if it qualifies for obtaining a status of rare plant. But it's not yet technically rare in our state. Watch listed. It's a candidate. So here is how what a grove of post oaks look like on the Cape. It's in Dennis, and the tree itself is probably the smallest of the tree oaks. It looks like a big apple tree, maybe the size of a big apple tree, quite small. But again, the foliage is very distinctive. And this photograph is interesting in a way because it shows you two different shrubby oaks. There are two species of shrubby oaks in our state. And it's interesting. I told you there's like about a dozen of different species of oaks, and they divide between the red and white group quite evenly, 6 and 6. And so one of each group belongs is a shrub. So there is one shrubby white oak and one shrubby red oak. So the one on the left belongs to the white group, and the one on the right belongs to the red group. So this one we already are familiar, at least those of you who listened to my conversation about Miles Standish State Forest. It's a signature oak there. It produces this signature plant community, pitch pine scrub oak plant community that covers the majority of territory there. So scrub oak is a very common shrub, not only in Miles Standish State Forest, not only in Plymouth, but elsewhere. For example, in the Blue Hills, if you climb high up the Great Blue Hill, it's called the Great Blue, but it's only 600 feet tall. Nevertheless, if you climb higher and higher up the trail there, all the tree oaks gradually disappear. And after the last of them disappears, there's only shrubby oaks around, scrub oaks mainly. So this is an oak of sandy soil and also rocky habitat, grows right on rocks. This one on the left, I would love to call it a counterpart of scrub oak. and it is a counterpart, but the difference is that it's a much rarer species and occurs very infrequently. I would like to call it the less frequent of common oaks. So it is probably the rarest of our common oaks. Well, let's look at it a little closer. You can tell, I hope by now you can tell right at a glance that this oak belongs to the white oak gang because it doesn't have points with bristles. It more has wavy margins. Sometimes it has little lobes like this. Sometimes not even lobes, but just wavy margin. And there are no bristles. Very elegant foliage. Sometimes it looks like this, as I said, hardly any lobes pronounced, and the leaves are sort of highlighted on the perimeter. Can you see that each leaf has this white line on the very edge of the leaf blade, as if some artist highlighted it to kind of exaggerate its shape. That's because it has this special cells on the margin. It's called cartilaginous margin, and that's what makes it look so sharp, the margin of the leaf. But the most unusual are the acorns of dwarf chestnut oak. Oh, I think I didn't mention that the name of this white oak, shrubby oak, is dwarf chestnut oak. So that means that the leaves are similar to chestnut oak, but the plant is dwarf as compared to chestnut oak. By the way, here are the big acorns of chestnut oak in comparison with the smallish acorns of very unusual purple color of dwarf chestnut oak. And even the caps, when they are fresh, are of this strange purplish pinkish color. So it's a very interesting little oak. I wish it was used more in horticulture because it's compact and it's very elegant. Now let me show you a couple maps of some of our white oaks. It's interesting that the maps are very much like each other with some differences, but basically they are all in eastern North America, more towards southeast, more or less, and they're stretched from northeast to southwest in that direction, the areas. And you see that all of these oaks are southerners in our flora in Massachusetts because some of them hardly reach Massachusetts, like post oak. Remember, I told you it reaches Massachusetts, but only to the Cape, and the rest of Massachusetts is not even within its range. So it's a total southerner in our flora, post oak or Quercus stellata. And you see, other than Massachusetts, outside Massachusetts, it has this rather large range that covers most of southeastern United States and even some of central states. But other oaks, dwarf chestnut oak, this shrubby oak, have even smaller ranges and hardly come into Massachusetts and not spreading any farther north than Massachusetts. So all of them are sort of at their northern limit with us. The only exception is, oh, sorry. The only exception is this chestnut oak, which reaches a little farther towards north and reaches New Hampshire and Vermont. But again, doesn't go any farther than that north. It doesn't hardly reaches any territories in Canada. So you have to keep in mind that all of these relatively rare oaks are southerners with us. And so in order to, I think I already showed you this photograph, but it's useful in order to jump from the white oak group, which we considered so far, to the red oak group, because here are both counterparts growing side by side. So let's look at scrub oak again. Scrub oak, as I said, is the landscape plant forming a major part of the cover underneath pitch pines. So they form this characteristic plant community that is called pitch pine scrub oak forest. And it looks very spectacular right now. See, the date is November 7th. The beauty of observing shrubby oaks is that all the flowering is taking place right in front of our eyes, versus all these tree oaks usually are not within reach. So you cannot observe them producing these beautiful catkins. But with scrub oak, it is very much possible. As you can see, scrub oak first produces these flowers, which are arranged in these long catkins, and then only after that it starts developing leaves. Here you see the scrub oak flowering in full bloom at the side of Great Blue Hill. There is a path surrounding the perimeter of Great Blue Hill, going right around Great Blue Hill at the mid-height of the hill, and that's called Eckert Path. And scrub oak has contrasting colors of its upper side and lower side of the leaf. So when the wind blows on scrub oaks, all of a sudden the entire area changes color from bright green to silvery. And as you can see, the date here is June 3rd, and this is about the time when the leaves are finally unrolled in their full size. And the leaves in shrubby oaks are generally smaller than the leaves of scrub oaks. Here is the buck moth consuming the leaves of scrub oak. Scrub oak gives shelter to myriads of different insects and serves shelter and food for many of them. And buck moth is a species of special concern in Massachusetts. It flies about the time when in the fall there's open hunt for bucks, for deer, and hence the name. It's just that the moth fly, the mature moths appear at the same time in the fall when bucks are hunted upon. This moth belongs to nocturnal family of moths, Saturnida. But this moth is not nocturnal, differently from other moths. And it is rare only here in the north, in Massachusetts. If you go further south, it becomes more and more common. And somewhere in North Carolina, they hate this moth because the caterpillars are poisonous. And if someone accidentally touches them, or better yet sits down on them, they are in trouble. They are stinging caterpillars. This is another caterpillar, another larva of another moth, also from the same family, but this one is called orange striped oak worm, also on scrub oak. But the orange stripes only appear on the later stages of development. This is the early stage, and there is no orange stripes, only this shining black head and shining black antennas on these caterpillars. And they can congregate also in large amounts and totally defoliate the whole shrub. But they don't kill, usually they don't kill the shrub because they appear late in the season, almost by the time that the oak is ready to drop its leaves. So they don't actually inflict a lot of harm on scrub oak. So the scrub oak is such a common shrub around here that it was very unexpectedly for me to open the flora of North America and see that the area of scrub oak is actually very small. It's common with us, but it's not common elsewhere. And as you can see, it's only within New England and reaching a little bit to the Appalachians, and that's it. It's probably the smallest area of them all, even though it's a common species with us. And here is a beautiful black giant, the black oak, Quercus velutina. It has very uniform bark, differently from other oaks, whose bark becomes different up the trunk. Here, the bark is all uniform and as if it's manufactured on some factory. And the same pattern that you can observe at the bottom of the trunk goes to these big black limbs. It really looks black from the distance. And the bark, as I said, is very uniform. It doesn't have straight lines and consists of small plates of a regular shape. Here's another example of black oak. Very beautiful tree, spectacular. And this branch has fallen down from the upper part of the crown, belongs to black oak. Here are the acorns that are small as compared to closely related red oak. The leaves are kind of similar to red oak, so it takes a little bit of training to be able to tell the black oak from red oak. These two oaks, black and red, are the most common oaks around here, I would say. And here is how black oak develops very young leaves in spring. They are covered with this multitude of whitish hairs, which are very short-lived and fall down very quickly. And the whole leaf changes its color to dark green. But in spring, here is an entire grove of black oak in Plymouth, photographing it from the salt marsh. It's a view from the salt marsh, and you see that the entire area is white with these developing leaves of black oaks. And this is from the opposite side, the view from the side of the grove. Here you see the flowering black oak with young leaves, and this is the view of the salt marsh. So I walked to the other side. So when the black oak leaves mature, they become very dark and at the same time shiny. They reflect light very well. You can see that white oak is here for comparison. It's not as dark and it's not reflecting light at all. It's quite matte. The leaves are quite matte. And so these are the distinctive characters that help you identify black oak. And also the shape of the leaf, at least of the leaves that are closer to the ground and shaded and develop big areas to catch the light. When they grow big as that, their widest part usually is closer to the tip of the summit of the leaf. And in red oak, it's not the case. They are more like bowl shaped, so the widest area would be about the middle of the leaf. So that helps you identify black oak. Also, oaks can be told by the shape and structure and texture of the acorns, and especially the caps. For example, here you see the little insignia uh, uh, along the margin of the cap, and that is typical for fringed caps of black oak. Smallish acorns and fringed caps. Also, the every scale of the cap is fringed too. So these scales are highlighted by these little fringes, and that helps identify black oak. Finally, I wanted to remind you that galls not just grow in Europe, they also grow here. Cynipida wasps produce these beautiful large galls just the way they do in Europe, but that's a different species. So I'm not sure that you can make ink. I don't think so. They are not good for the ink making. Here is our wasp, Cynipida wasp. It's also very small, not more than 2 millimeters in length. And it's the author of this produces this big spectacular galls on different oaks, but in this case, it's on black oak. When the galls are young, they are green. They look like green apples, little apples growing on oak branches. And then when they mature, they become papery and cranky and yellowish, like straw color like this. And then they fall to the ground after the caterpillars leave them through the holes that they make themselves. So this is just a reminder that this has to do with, that all galls have to do with this beautiful ink. And finally, the most interesting part I left to the very end. This is one spectacular swamp white oak, and I'm sitting at its bottom. Oaks are very long-lived, as we all know. They can live to 500 and 600 years easily. And during their lifetime, one oak, a single tree, if it matures to this good size, can produce up to 5 million acres. But what is strange is that it not necessarily any single of these 5 million acres will end up producing this mature tree. So all of these efforts during 500 years of producing acorns may be in vain. And so it's quite a rare event that an acorn will mature in this beautiful tree. So here's the close-up view of its unusually beautiful bark. What was underneath this beautiful tree was a whole large population of seedlings. And so we were able to admire not just the large tree, but the fact that it was able to reproduce this itself in large amounts. So as you can see, there's a multitude of little seedlings under this great big oak. And all of them are looking pretty uniform. So you can guess that they all started at the same year. That was a special year that produced this whole generation of little seedlings. And that's one interesting thing that we observe here. So I already told you that usually
animals decimate new crops of those oaks that belong to white oak group pretty swiftly after they fall down. And usually there is no chance for this large population of seedlings to even uh, be produced. So what happened here? Why do we have this big population? Well, the truth is that once in a few years, once in 4 or 5 years, oaks produce these huge populations, huge crops of oaks. And this is an adaptation to the fact that they have to cohabit with animals. So uh, the whole strategy is to sort of overcome the decimation and produce so many acorns that even the squirrels uh, uh, won't be able to consume them all at once, and most of them, uh, they out of their greediness, they make uh, preserves. They bury oaks underground for the winter time, and they will bury that many, such a huge amount of oaks that they would never be able to consume. So most of their burials would go into growing the next spring. So this is a sort of a technique that trees employ against animals. But on the other hand, because of the availability of such a large source of food, the population of squirrels would grow tremendously the next year because many more squirrels would survive the winter. And so, if the oaks would employ this large crops technique year after year, that would only result in enlargement of population of consumers, and that wouldn't work. But the truth is that oaks, uh, for the next following year, they will produce only a meager crops of acorns. So that helps oaks regulate the population of their consumers. So all these multitudes of squirrels and chipmunks won't survive the next following winter, and the population of consumers will go thus back to normal. And so these cycles repeat uh, every 4 or 5 years. But this is quite a witty invention of the Mother Nature, how to regulate the population of um, organisms that have to cohabit certain areas. But the interesting thing about all that uh, is that if you think about it, uh, it's a big question mark. How do the oaks in the large area agree with one another to produce this large crop on a certain year? Basically, there is no answer to these questions to this question in science right now, because uh, the first thing that comes to mind is, of course, the mycorrhiza. Remember, we talked about the fungus, the fungal hyphas that kind of penetrate the entire forest grounds, forest litter, and connect trees with one another. So the fungus exchanges chemicals and substances with trees with which it connects, and this is a mutually beneficial relationship between trees and the fungal component. And so once they are able to exchange chemicals, chemicals can serve as chemical signals, right? So um, I can imagine that trees are capable to contact and send information um, among the population, amidst their population towards each other via the connection of of hyphals, fungal little very thin threads that connect them together. So you can think about mycorrhiza connections as an internet of the forest. Uh, but even if you assume that's how they correspond with each other, the trees, there's still another question mark. What triggers the decision? Who makes the decision to launch another mast years? That part is still unknown. How do they decide? There is no voting involved. There is no correspondence discussion. Previous discussion is impossible, so we don't know what exactly triggers the mast years. If it were the weather, then why do these cycles are so regular? Because the weather is unpredictable. You cannot say that the same weather repeats itself every 4 or 5 years. So this must be something different. And the fact that they found out and do it simultaneously, even different species in the same area, is not as much amazing to me as the fact that the whole thing is even possible to start and be effective within a large area. So maybe you have ideas about this, and if you do, please share them with me. It's a question that has seemed interesting to me for a long time. I searched literature, never found the answer to this question. So with this big question mark, I wrap up our conversation about oaks today, and I hope you appreciate them a little more than before and find them pretty interesting and versatile. Uh, there's a lot to think about in nature if you look attentively and give it a little bit of a thought. Bye now. See you next time.